feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled Movie Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
That's Wizard, Matt.
That's Wizard, Annie. Eric, how are you on this fine, brisk December evening?
I thought you were going to go into a pirate accent there. Yarr,
Yarr.
yarr. Okay. I mean, like, it's gotten to that point now where, you know, the end of the year is near, where, you know, the days are getting shorter. It's more depressing. Seasonal depression comes in. So you're looking for things to entertain you. You're looking for things to cheer you up, comfort food in that way. And I think what we're going to be reviewing today and talking about kind of falls into that category.
Yeah, this is fun because I have no idea what you think of this. We haven't talked about this at all. And what's fun, we're reviewing the first 3 episodes of Skeleton Crew today. Don't you dare put Star Wars in front of it, because on the show it doesn't have Star Wars in the title anywhere.
It's like Daniel at the end of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
It's Dan now.
It's Dan now. It's just Skeleton Crew now.
So we're going to be reviewing the first 3 episodes. Episodes 1 and 2 are now streaming on Disney Plus as you're listening to this. So the embargo broke as the first 2 episodes dropped on Disney Plus. We will be reviewing episodes 1 through 3 though. So by this point, you've probably watched the first 2 episodes. We won't spoil anything from episode 3. This will be completely spoiler free. But if you don't want to know anything, then maybe bow out if you don't want to know anything about the second episode, because maybe we'll drop little things here and there, but nothing major story spoilers or anything like that. So I just want to get that out of the way. Eric, Star Wars, always my point being, I haven't talked to you about what you thought at all. I've texted you, so you already kind of knew where I was coming from. And Star Wars, especially in 2024 and for the last eternity, has always been a divisive topic of conversation for people. It's a love it, hate it kind of franchise, or love it and hate it at the same time. I think lately people have been a bit down on Star Wars. I think since, I hate saying the thou who shall not be named, but The Last Jedi. I think we've been in this contentious fighting atmosphere with Star Wars. If you fucking hate the Disney era, or you love certain things, Andor is universally loved.
Down with Kathleen Kennedy, yada yada yada.
Yeah, all that bullshit, right? Yeah. And we go into this every time we review a Star Wars. I think what's clear is I really like Star Wars, and for the good and the bad and everything in between, that doesn't mean every single thing we're going to get is going to be great, or I'm going to give a pass. But every once in a while, you get something like an Andor that feels genre specific, feels specific to, telling a slice of that universe that both fits into, the prequel movie we got, but is doing its own thing and is very political, like Star Wars is, and is intense and adult. And then you can get something on the other side, like Skeleton Crew, we're about to talk about today, which is very kid focused, very kid friendly, very adventure focused, very fun. So I think that'll be kind of interesting to talk about those 2 things. And I bring those 2 things up specifically because those are 2 of, we'll get into my thoughts, but my favorite things that I've seen out of Star Wars in quite some time. But I have no idea. I'll get into my thoughts. Before we go, the lineup of directors on the series, they put out, which they don't usually do, the lineup of people. And if people aren't aware, you have John Watts, who created the series with, what's the other guy's name? Christopher Ford. Thank you, Eric. Who is kind of
not related to Harrison Ford.
But good lineage there when it comes to Star Wars, I guess, with at least by name only. So they're kind of like the showrunners and creators, but then the list of people you have brought in, you have some returning directors from Mandalorian, like Bryce Dallas Howard and Lee Isaac Chung.
Mr. Twisters himself.
Yeah. But then you have people like, and I think this may be because in the pirate adventure kind of element, you have someone like David Lowery coming in doing episodes 2 and 3, and then you have the Daniels coming in and doing episode 4. And I don't know who I'm missing there from the directors, but those are like the heavy hitters.
Jake,
Oh yeah, who's doing
sure, who's doing Thunderbolts and
Thunderbolt?
actually
Yeah.
worked with Christopher Ford on Robot and Frank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like a really, really solid list of directors, which is why I was originally excited for this show. And I just liked the idea of Star Wars, being able, like I said, with Andor, being able to, I think it's at its best. And I was talking to our friends at Geekcentric about this with Justin and Nate.
Oh, those
And,
nerds.
and they brought it up too. I forget. I think it was Justin made a great point of being like, yeah, Star Wars is at its best when it's very genre specific. And I completely agree with him. So, I will get into my thoughts in a second, Eric. I want to toss it over to you because we have been the negative Nancy's, the bad boys of cinema this year.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know what you thought of Skeleton Crew.
Well, the nostalgic bones of Amblin Entertainment define Skeleton Crew, and you can see that in every shot when it comes to specifically E.T. and the Goonies kind of being reference points of what a lot of these directors probably grew up on, not just Star Wars, like the suburban sort of setting, the mundanity of, the 9 to 5, being a kid kind of trapped in, your own fantasies, like all of those elements are intriguing, and bringing in a much younger sort of group dynamic has that kind of fun. Like, it even reminded me a little bit of like something like Cloak and Dagger, like those kids movies in the 80s and early 90s where there's no parental supervision or lack thereof, and they kind of get swept up into something bigger, usually by accident, and they have to resolve it. And in this case, it's partly a story about getting home. You have that core group. I'm mixed positive on it. I think it really starts to pick up in episode 3. The first 2 episodes, and I think even with Andor, I had the same problem, and I ended up loving Andor, is that, the first few episodes that you watch, even though you know the world and the world building itself, you're introducing some new characters. You're having to set the table. You're having to, establish what the stakes are, what the rules are, what the tone is. And then when you get into the 3rd episode, that's when it feels like it's starting to lift off and the story really is about to begin. And it probably is very strategic that the Daniels episode, which is 4, they didn't show us because they're saving that and wanting everyone to tune in for episode 4. And this being the first thing that the Daniels have done post Everything Everywhere All at Once. With all of that in mind, I think the strongest elements in it are, bringing in some interesting actors for the casting, having a little bit of that, like, because even in ET, you had Elliot, talking to ET and playing with Star Wars toys. When we're first introduced to women in episode 1, not episode 1, The Phantom Menace, but episode 1 of this show, he's
It sounded
playing.
like when we were introduced to women in episode 1.
Oh, Wim.
I know.
Wim in episode 1. He's playing with Jedi toys.
Yeah.
And it feels like, okay, that's something that I think any Star Wars fan can relate to, in the sense of when you're a child, you have those action figures. And so there's like this weird meta context to it going on. And I like that. And I like that it's far enough removed. I'm still not the biggest fan of everything having to be Jedi centric in some way or another. I think that's one thing.
But being from a kid's perspective, I
get it, but there are other characters. Like, I was, a dumb kid and loved Boba Fett and the Bounty Hunters more than I loved the Jedis. Like, why does it have to always be about the fucking Jedis?
I get what you're saying, but
like, it's got charm. It has a good sort of amount of atmosphere. Jude Law's kind of playful and fun in his role. there's a couple of freak type characters. The
Oh,
freak meter,
so many good little
the
freaks.
ferryman in particular, I really loved.
Oh, it's the best.
It almost looked like a marionette without the strings. The way that it kind of like moved.
It's so great.
And Brutus, I really liked Brutus as well. In terms of the pirate villain, the mutineers. But there's also something about it that feels a little bit like it's easy to poke holes in. There's one character in episode 3 that's a fun design, but something that she says to one of the kids later on doesn't make sense, and there's no way for her to contact this person. It's stuff like that where you're like, oh, okay. But in terms of like the fantasy, it almost leans more into fantasy than it does sci-fi for the first couple of episodes until they leave suburbia. And then it's almost like this kind of the intrigue of a gated community within a star system, and also thinking of like, what are you protecting and who are you protecting and who are the interests are, but also just the mundanity of 9 to 5 and living within the confines of having, your path chosen for you at a kid's age, I think is also something that I really appreciated, because when you are a kid, it's like your whole life is determined based on, if you're in the US, like SATs and testing, and you have to make a choice when you're still developing, like to put that kind of pressure on any kid to feel like, oh, well, they have to, pick a job or a career path when, you're 12 or 13 or even younger. It's like, well, you might not want that 20 years from now. It's such a stress. And I think those relatable real world aspects help kind of play into it. And overall, yeah, I enjoyed it. I think like the next episode will really determine episode 4, where it's like, okay, is this going to really take off? Or is this something that is going to be like a little weird cul-de-sac of Star Wars that has like a one and done kind of season to it? And the way that a lot of these do feel somewhat self-contained. Obviously Andor is designed only to be 2 seasons, and it has to be in terms of the continuity. But this takes place between the fall of the Empire and the rise of the New Republic. And I appreciate that these are characters we haven't seen before, and we're getting away from Skywalker. And
even criticizing the New Republic, I think, is interesting too.
Yeah. And looking at it from the inside, how the sausage is made, and how, like what has value or meaning to one person, and then like compared to somebody else, it's like lunch money or something like that. It's like those things are kind of interesting. And again, like I was talking before about the idea of, a gated community protected from the rest of the world or the rest of the universe. And I think that's an interesting conversation to have, especially
and what
now.
It used to be centuries and thousands of years ago, I think is kind of really interesting, because you have this vast universe and the Jedi and how that all plays into it, of how the Jedi have been around for thousands of years, and what this planet was, and the mystery behind that, and the kids' kind of sense of wonder throughout it all, and being from the kids' perspective. I was locked in from the moment it began and all in on it right away. I love the design of the home planet. I know some people were dunking on it online, being like, why would you create Cleveland in the Star Wars universe?
But that's what works.
And that's what works though too, man, because
it's middle America.
It is. And I think Star Wars has always done this, where it's taken stuff in our culture and in our lives and adapted that and said, what if we put goofy ass aliens and droids and other tech, but applied it to, what we know and what these filmmakers know and what these creators know, and how that can apply in this big, vast universe where you can create anything. I know the criticism is like, you can create anything in the galaxy and you create Earth. And I'm like, well, in this infinite galaxy, why wouldn't there be something like Earth, especially because we are telling these stories and you want them to be relatable, but then you can insert an elephant boy and a weird little freak owl cat, and like all these different
Kim,
kind of,
please.
And like all you mentioned, the shuttle creature, the ferryman. The ferryman is amazing, and like just applying these things that we see in our society and then putting it into Star Wars. It's the Jetsons. We've always done this and it fucking kicks ass. Like, it's really, really fun to see it from these kids' perspective. And they're obsessed with Jedis just like we were as a kid. And seeing them look on their technology and read about the Jedi and the history and
Still taking
things
the
of
bus
why.
too, right? Like that feels
Yeah.
very relatable and
And
like being late for school.
I love how that's all applied to the Star Wars universe and to this thing. Star Wars can be so many different things, then why can't it also be something that we relate to? So I really, from the get-go, really bought into the
The
world
gecko?
building of that planet. I just, I absolutely thought it was the perfect way of getting you to connect to your childhood, or if you're a kid, of what you're going through now, or even applying it to those, what you mentioned with Amblin movies and things from like the 80s and stuff like that, which is obviously this is clearly trying to imitate. And I think doing a very, very good job at that. I think the relationship between the key kids is pitch perfect. I thought everyone is really, really great. Like playing into all the tropes of when you were a kid or in these movies that you would see in Goonies and stuff like that, whether it's boys versus girls or trying to hide things, or everyone having their own motive of what they're doing, but trying to use each other, I think is fantastic. I think the juxtaposition between like the sheltered New Republic and the people like kind of in the Outer Rim with this whole pirate world, when they're shocked at seeing the New Republic credits and things like that. Like, I love that world building and lore building from Star Wars. And I think we've always got like, oh, the Outer Rim is in almost a different, it's unsanctioned almost and things like that. So seeing both in Andor and in this, to bring more comparisons of that kind of, we saw condo buildings in Andor, right? And we're seeing,
And it reminded me of
suburbia.
Toronto, about how like gray and dull and gross
Yeah.
and Andor in this case, but also the other planet. I can't believe I'm forgetting the name of it, but in Attack of the Clones, the planet that Obi-Wan goes to locate,
Yes.
that is the clone planet, where
Yeah.
it's not on any of the maps, and it was a secret sort of base for Master Cypher Diaz, who becomes Palpatine, right, to create all of this stuff. It has a similar kind of like reference point, or even the power converter, the power, the thing that Fern is looking at.
Oh,
Yeah. The power converter, whatever it is. Like there are those references to the past movies, and the character.
Oh, they are looking for a power converter. I know exactly.
Power converter. Yeah. I for a second there, I thought it was called something else, like more specific to like to the films or to the stories. But yeah, so like those things are there in terms of like touch points of like, oh, the references to Star Wars is universal within the universe, but it does feel like its own thing. It almost feels like it's like the live action version of an episode of Visions in a way.
Totally. And I think that meta kind of thing of playing off of these kids, of how, a lot of people feel about Star Wars over the years, or when you were a kid, and applying that in universe, I think is really, really kind of clever and smart. And I think it is a show that both, Star Wars fans, if you're an adult, can enjoy it. I think it's great for kids as an introduction to Star Wars as well. Like, I would be obsessed with this if I was those kids' age, just much like a lot of those movies and things that we're referencing from when we were kids, or even earlier in the 80s. Like, I love the sense of humor and the sense of adventure and fun. Like you mentioned Jude Law already. I think I thought that opening in that kind of space Pirates of the Caribbean kind of thing is a really, really fun vibe. I think I agree with you that it does take a little bit of time for you to kind of, I think, get invested in this world or invested into these kids. And I have no idea what other people think. I haven't looked at anything. So I am curious after these first 2 episodes if people will be vibing with it or not. Cause I definitely think the kid focused kind of playful sense of humor kind of thing won't work for everyone. But I think if you do like movies like the Goonies and Amblin stuff, like E.T. and from when we were kids, like, I think you will really vibe with this. I think the sense of humor, like there are a couple moments with Jude Law's character that I think are great. There's a moment he shoots a the blaster into the air, and even seeing the piece of debris fall onto the ground is something that I don't know, was just like a fun sight gag in Star Wars, because people just shooting blasters everywhere. I like even the planet that they go to and seeing like the droid giving tattoos, and it has tattoos all over it, like drawings on it. I think stuff like that is very, very clever. And even the trope of Jude Law using these kids and scamming them to get his own way, and not knowing his full motives, I think is a blast. I just think like, taking that, the world building they've done here and applying it to our own world, like even how they use that for moisture farms on Tatooine, right? Like a lot of that is just taken from real life farms that we would be on Earth, and just how to apply some space nonsense to this. And I think this
Get that blue
show,
milk.
this show does such a great job of taking that space nonsense and adapting it. Even blue milk and like animals, like it's taking stuff we do on Earth. And that's what Star Wars always was. You have humanoids on these planets, but then you're mixed with droids and mixed with, I love the commentary on droids throughout basically all of Star Wars, and how we've gotten that, and how shitty people treat droids, and even the kids on the school bus, man, like going over and fucking with the droid as it's driving them to school, like it was the school bus driver, and just seeing kind of like, and like you said, kids who are unsupervised. And some of it can be corny or cliche or derivative of like those 80s movies we're talking about and stuff like that. But I think when you put it into Star Wars and just have that kind of set dressing or wrapping around it, it was so much fun to me, that to the point where I had a smile on my face watching the entire thing, and I was just like locked in, like really, really digging it, and some of the reveals about the planet that they come from, and without getting in too much into the details, I think that is the intriguing stuff at the end of episode 3 that will lead into that Daniels episode, where
They do say it 100 times, though. It does feel like they're trying to make the name of Ad-Atten memorable, where they say it like, I think like 30 times between
because it's supposed to be this
3.
myth, right?
Yeah.
This planet
Where?
no one knows.
Ad-Atten. Who?
Yeah.
Where are you going? Ad-Atten.
Yeah, they do say it a lot. I will give you that. But I love this idea of these kids think their planet is boring and shitty, and like again, suburban kids, right?
Then it
They're
becomes
like,
blue velvet, right? Where underneath
Yeah.
the surface, there's something sinister lurking, which I'm sure, like, some of it does feel, with the casting, like Kerry Condon, who's playing an undersecretary in the film, and is also Fern's mom. Like, you obviously know, like, she's going to be the villain, probably, because you don't cast like a recent Oscar nominee in a thankless role. Like, there's purpose. It's like the same thing with David Thewlis being in Wonder Woman, right? Like, you kind of know, like, with casting, it's like when someone shows up, it's like, okay, well, their role, there's usually intent with that. But something that you mentioned that I think is worth mentioning in maybe even greater detail here is, the expendable nature of robots. You mentioned the bus driver, but also during class, before the tests, the evaluations, you have Wim talking about what he wants to be. And he says, he doesn't say Jedi outright, but he basically does.
Like a hero, basically.
Hero, but then you have the droid in the classroom teaching, saying, oh, we have safety droids for that. And then, in the later episodes, you have Nick Frost voicing SM-33, who's really leaning into like the Cockney pirates.
Which is so much fun, dude. Like the whole peg
with the peg leg.
and
Yeah, but them going back to help him, and valuing what he has to bring to the table, and not just simply, dispensing with him. Like, I think like that is kind of, an interesting concept in terms of how kids see things or value things differently to adults, in how, what we prioritize in our lives, or how we project upon objects, or find that kind of sentimentality in things that maybe, the older you get, you kind of can do away with a little bit more. So I appreciated, like, that felt like a real kind of moment. And character wise, I think the kids are a little bit kind of caricatures, but I do really like the back and forth that's being set up right now between Jude Law's character, Nawood, and KB. Like, I like that KB is questioning his authority and actually presenting logical and pragmatic reasoning to why, you know, his own motivations might not be genuine, or might
Yeah.
have an insidious connotation to them all. So like that stuff I really do appreciate. Or even like Fern actually weirdly reminds me of Vin Diesel, in the sense where she has this faux toughness. And I
Sure.
think that comes from being like, you know, the rich kid
Yes,
that is trying to
absolutely.
prove that she can hang with, you know, anybody else, and is trying, maybe doing that a little too hard, to the point where it's like, what are you trying to prove? And
Well, all
it's
those
this
tropes
shield,
of the
right?
parents, right? Each one with the absent parent versus the
Yeah.
overbearing parent versus like
The
I kind
single
of like
dad, you know, who's
yeah.
played by the actor from, or played by the musician from TV on the Radio, who was just in Twisters as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Shout out to Jaleel White. Urkel's in this.
Yeah.
Like, come
That was
on,
a
dude.
little distracting when I saw him, and I was like, okay. Like, I'm glad he's getting work, you know, but that did take me out for just a second.
Yeah. Do you think? I think most people won't even recognize him for the most part.
Yeah,
But
Tunde
like,
Bimpe is
okay, cool.
Wim's dad.
Wim's dad.
And so like with that, like I kind of like even that casting where it's not a traditional like character actor or TV guy or somebody that's up and coming, but it's like a musician, you know, and first and foremost, and like that's kind of interesting in terms of like what this is going for, because it doesn't feel, the other movie it reminded me of a little bit as well is like the Never Ending Story with Wim, where like he's, you know, had
Mhm.
creating his own
Own world kind
world,
of thing. Yeah.
own fantasy, you know, and hiding from the reality of life.
Yeah.
You know, whether that like maybe there is some pain there because his mom or whoever is not in the picture anymore. So he's really reverted into that even more so than normal, and him being obsessed with not only Jedi's but discovering a temple. And I thought of you actually when you have this key moment of a reveal, because it reminded me also of Lost, you know, just in terms of a latch. Uh, and so like that mystery box JJ Abrams thing is all there within this as
And
well.
I eat that shit up, and I love
You
that stuff,
ET
and I
shit that up.
yeah, exactly. And the show is playing in all these tropes that we mentioned, like again, and some of it can come across as uh kind of like corny or overdone, and even the stuff with
Mick
the absent.
Giacchino's score
But
also, I think, like
yeah,
kind of plays with that a little bit. Like it's trying
there's
to,
a lost connection there too. But yeah,
yeah,
JJ and Giacchino. But yeah,
but it is trying to like subvert your expectations even with the score in terms of how it's playing with it. Like at one time it sounds almost like a music box being wound up
yep,
and playing, or like it's almost not juvenile but very much like in the headspace of the kids. And so like that creates almost like a weird grounding to the material on top of where they're coming from and where they're
yeah.
trying to get back to. Like I like that it is fairly simplistic in its design of what the kids want or what they need. You know, like part of it is like, oh yeah, we want to seek adventure and explore beyond the boundaries of, you know, our little kind of suburban mundanity. But then, you know, once they're out there, it's like, okay, well, how do you get back? And that's really it. You know, it's not
It,
just like, it's not overcomplicating things with like, oh, we got to find a MacGuffin, then we have to do this and this and this, and
they're
then we have
adding
to
that
save
stuff
the
with the
world.
lore of Ad-Atten, but
But it was
I
already there in their backyard, right?
exactly, and I love that, of just kids find a starship, accidentally hit the hyperdrive,
Starships were meant for
and
flying.
then in this universe, especially when you're on a planet that doesn't have much contact with the outside world, like how do you get back? And especially getting caught up into these space pirates, I think it's just really fun, man. Like even if it plays in all these tropes, I think it's doing a good job at kind of not necessarily even subverting them, but just like I mentioned of applying those tropes to from these 80s movies and kid focused movies and TV shows, and applying that to Star Wars. It's simple, but it's just like you said earlier, I think you mentioned it as comfort food, where it's cold
Yeah.
outside and it's just like it's not necessarily doing anything groundbreaking.
It's
Like
having
I don't
fun.
yeah, which I think is what Star Wars needs to be. And going back and realizing Star Wars was first for kids, That doesn't mean all Star Wars needs to be for kids, or even Skeleton Crew being only for kids. I think it can be enjoyed by just adult Star Wars fans as well, that it has some nostalgia in you. But I really do think going back to that and just going, let's make something that's fun and filled with adventure, doesn't take itself too seriously, can have fun with it, but still playing with all the kind of tropes, both from what we mentioned and in Star Wars itself. So many weird little freaks. We only mentioned a few of them, but like, I will give a shout out that I think the show looks good. Like I think, at least from a mix of practical effects and visual effects, I think um the Star Wars shows have gotten better and better at balancing those. And I think if you look at even early Mandalorian, which is excellent to this, with the volume and the cities feeling very bare and barren and stuff like that, like I think they've done a better job feeling lived in and filled with different weird little freaks. And um it's my favorite thing in Star Wars, of going to some corner we haven't really been to and seeing some creature we've never seen before, and having that from a child's point of view, from a sheltered, like a group of children that are sheltered on this boring suburban planet that might have this deep history under it of like treasure and stuff like that. Like I
It's
think
like
that's
someone from the Midwest going to New York or LA for the first time. That's
sort of,
basically what
yeah.
it is, right? Like, it's like
And
you're a suburbanite and you're going to the big city and you've never been there before and you're a kid, and maybe it's like you hop
it's
on the
Home
bus
Alone
or
2, right?
train.
Like,
Yeah, Lost in New York, and that's
yeah,
exactly what it is, where it's overwhelming because it's new to you, but it's like your world gets bigger as you grow older too, right? When you start, the world does feel huge because you're so small and you don't venture out, but as you start to grow, you become more familiar with the street that you live on. Then, as you get older, you become more familiar with, the region or the community, and then that further expands into the city, and then, you travel, to another part of the world, and then, things seem to feel smaller, and then, you want to seek the next thing, and I kind of feel like there's a play of that as well, with like even like some of the shots, like obviously there's one sequence that David Lowery directs in episode 2 where it's like a low angle shot of like foliage and grass, and it kind of lifts up, and that basically is like directly a scene seal from ET, when ET lands, and then you have all the flashlights looking around in the area, and the camera kind of lifts up, and then you see this the suburban scape of it all. So
yeah.
it knows what it is, and it's not trying to be anything else. Like, it's just trying to do it as well as it possibly can and be playful and entertaining. But then also, I think you already mentioned it at the beginning of this, I think part of like their selling point for this is that they're saying, oh, well, we're bringing in, these hip indie up and coming directors, or established at this point, because I wouldn't say that David Lowery's like, you know, a first timer by any means at this point. But in terms of doing this kind of stuff, it's always interesting to see him jump back and forth and, make something that is a ghost story, and then, make a Star Wars story. So, like, I think that's probably selling it to us, like as like movie people, as fans of
It's smart,
these
yeah.
filmmakers. Yeah. And like, it's almost like saying, hey, these people are, it's not Dave Filoni, like, it's like Dave Filoni's an executive producer here.
He's here for the lore stuff and the continuity,
Yeah.
but as a producer, but we're going to get cool directors to come in and do this Star Wars kids show. And I think it's like, I mean, Lowry's always with Pete's Dragon and Peter Pan and Wendy. And, I appreciate him from going to, the Green Knight to Peter Pan and Wendy, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's, he can do both. And you can tell he really cares. Like, he wants to make things that are fun for children.
It's not just a paycheck.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. He seems like he goes, okay, I can put a little bit of my art into this, but still make it very accessible to children. And I think that's really kind of cool. And I'm very curious to see the Daniels, like what their their sense of humor could align to children very, very well, right? Like how many fart jokes are we getting in episode 4? We'll see. But I think, and weird little freaks, right? Like I think there's going to be some really fun
Swiss
stuff.
Admiral Akbar.
Yeah, like, and maybe they won't feel like them. It'll still, like, even the 2 Lowry episodes, I think they were very well directed. And Lowry's one of those guys that I don't know if if he has like a stamp where I immediately know it's him, but
I mean, I think tone for him, I think
yeah,
it's, I think all of his movies have this feeling of sense of place and time, and there's something just either slightly heightened, or it does feel like a fairy tale. A
yeah,
lot of his stuff, like, you mentioned Green Knight, but even Ain't Them Body Saints, A Ghost Story, like there's something about them that does feel, not like it's somewhere between a fairy tale or like a kid's book and a Grimm's fairy tale. Like
yeah,
it's sort of like cutting the middle, and it is somewhat melancholic, and there is whimsy, but it's not suffocating, or it's not obnoxious to the point where
absolutely.
like it turns you off. In some of these like latchkey kid stories can be
Mhm.
a little bit like too much, like in the fantasy realm where it becomes too much, but then it's not dark and disturbing in a way that maybe is leaning into the R-rated stuff either, because it's not simply, you know um Dev Patel secreting a fluid and a close up of that. Like it's not that
Sure.
either. Like it is a kid's show still. So
And
you have
he's
to
good
have
at
those.
both though.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. And even seeing, I'm happy for John Watts too, because like I think he
Ghost
did a
Wolves.
good. Yeah, I mean, I really am, because like I do like the guy. I think he did a good job with his Spider-Man movies, but I do genuinely really like Cop Car. So
Which
for
Chris
him to
Ford
kind of,
wrote. So
yes, so seeing them kind of come back to this, like Cop Car has a lot of elements you'd see, like you can tell it was also inspired by a lot of the stuff we're talking about in Skeleton Crew, and you could see why he would want to make this, like after seeing what he did with Cop Car, like it feels more in that realm. And obviously he played with younger, people in Spider-Man and stuff like that, and he had a good sense of humor in all of those shows too, even though they're written by
Jude Law's Kevin Bacon in this show.
essentially, right? Like,
Yeah.
and Jude Law does a good job, man. Like I
He's
like
always
the,
good though.
yeah, he's always good. So
And I like the
I
older he's getting too. Like there's something about grizzled older Jude Law with the receding hairline
yeah,
and the
I can
sinewy
appreciate.
age. Like he's like, even though the movie's not great, but like I really loved him even in The Order. Like I think like there's something
Yep.
about the gravitas that he has with age that gives him a sense of maturity and respect. But also like a sinister side to him. Like I think he's so good at being kind of like untrustworthy, like you're not sure. Like
Yeah,
he looks handsome enough, and he looks kind of like, oh, like, he seems very proper. But then there's something kind of also like wormy about him that I think is like, it's like that perfect sort of blend that makes him the best choice for a role like this.
I totally agree. Yeah, I think that opening scene is a lot of fun applying, pirate logic to space pirates and Star Wars. And I know they've gone into that stuff in other ways, whether it's, through the extended universe stuff or comics or video games and things like that. But I think they just applying that to this show and those two worlds colliding, especially from a kid's perspective, is so much fun. So yeah, that's 3 episodes. I'm very excited to see the Daniels episode. Like that is must see TV for me. So, and I'm really kind of, it's the most fun I've had in a Star Wars thing. Like I've enjoyed most of what we've gotten since Last
Mostly.
Jedi, like mostly. I haven't been on the negative side of things. Like I really enjoyed the Acolyte. Near the end of it, I did kind of maybe fall off of it and wasn't as interested, but I still mostly enjoyed it. I think
Mostly.
uh
Sorry.
Mandalorian season 3 kind of fell off a bit, and I liked Ahsoka. So like I've been more on the positive side of Star Wars, and I know you even have. Like you've been more mixed positive than I think some of the negativity around Star Wars over the last little while. And I'm not saying you can't be critical of Lucasfilm and what they're doing with Star Wars. But I really think this is a lot of fun. I have no idea what others think of it, so I'm very curious to see. That embargo always was kind of like interesting to me. Like I feel like they don't know how people will react to this show.
Yeah,
So they
it's almost like
kind
they're
of,
covering their bases, because when you get an embargo like that, that usually says that, oh, they don't have. I vote no confidence in Chancellor Valorum. I vote no confidence in this show, and so you're thinking to yourself, oh, it's got to be bad, or it's not working, or it's like the same thing when we get when you don't get a press screening. Like usually the studio thinks like, oh well, we have a turkey on our hands, and this is not going to be what we hoped for, so we're gonna like hide it until like the last possible second. But then sometimes that's not the case. Like I think this happened this year with even something like M. Night Shyamalan's Trap, where that did not screen for press. And I think that was a big mistake on Warner Brothers' part, because it's already like now like people are reclaiming that movie already, which is very funny to me. And it's actually like a fun little genre movie. And I feel like it's almost like not the same in terms of like what M. Night's doing here, and what Skeleton Crew is attempting, but in the sense of like, when a studio doesn't have faith in the force in their material, there is that feeling of like the reaction automatically is, oh, it's not great, or why aren't they
yeah.
showing us this?
But then I also see it from the other side of wanting to get all of your press right when it drops, because you want people to immediately have access to it. I think sometimes if you make an embargo too early, especially if that won't carry longer, then that positive press or negative press, whatever, um, might fade by the time it comes out. So I wonder if the strategy really is just because they did give us an extra episode, right? Like, so that does show that we're able to talk about something a week before the next one. So they are confident enough there. So what my thinking was, maybe it's just, a lot of the times, inside baseball stuff, people ask for the reviews to be held until the day of release, or at least, the week of release, because you want that press right before something comes out, because you want something to either listen to a podcast or read a review and then be able to immediately consume that content, for lack of a better term, right?
Yeah.
So I think maybe that's the situation here. I am very curious because I was so positive on it, and I've talked to Justin and Nate and other people who had the screeners, and
They don't talk to me. What's the deal?
well, I messaged them. So,
Oh.
cause like I watched it and I knew, cause with these things, when we see stuff early, there's not very many people to talk to. It's just like,
Yeah.
oh, I can message Eric about it because he's also embargoed and has seen this stuff too. But I knew that they were doing the junket stuff for it. So I wanted to see what their thoughts were. And I think Nate was, I don't want to speak for them. I wanted to talk to them about it if they end up doing like a spoiler cast or something, because I have fun talking to those guys, and they were both passionate. I think Justin really loved it. Nate was like, he was more on like your side of going like, I hope, episode 4 really gets me, like, but
Yeah.
I was locked in right from the get go. And I just had so much fun. And, I love movies like the Goonies and E.T. and all the Amblin stuff and 80s, kids on an adventure kind of thing. So it's right up my alley. And when you apply all the kind of Star Wars stuff on top of it, it's exactly what I'm looking for. So I think it'll be kind of like a fun, just easy December watch. And whether it's just one and done, or, which I'm fine with things being one and done, but like the Acolyte feels a little like a bad taste in our mouth just based on the reaction from people, and then setting up so much and then probably not getting any of that because of how it did. So
Yeah, no Dark Watto.
yeah, so we'll see. I don't think we'll be reviewing each episode, but we'll talk about it after it probably airs,
Wraps
on
up as well.
wraps up, because
I mean, maybe
I
we'll
will
talk
watch
about the Daniels episode on just a regular show. Just
That's
to see
true, because
how it is, because like post Everything Everywhere All at Once, I think like that's just even interesting in terms of like, okay, they have another movie that they've set up at Universal, but this is like the first thing that they've done post award season for that film. And like, is that like within the half an hour or 45 minutes of that episode that they're going to do, I could even see it being more of the Daniels. If I'm sure that there's a playbook for the Skeleton Crew in terms of like what they're going for, but you look at like the music videos that they've directed, and those are such small doses of like 2 to 3 minutes, but their style is so strong in those music videos that I feel like the feature realm, while it's still very much them, but maybe because they're stretching it over like 90 minutes to 2 hours, you're getting a little bit more padding in between. So I'd be curious to see if like in a condensed story, if there is like a big set piece from them.
Oh, I hope there's
or
something ridiculous,
yeah,
and I have no doubt there will be. And if you look at things like, to an extent, I know we don't love the guy right now, but Taika Waititi doing some Mandalorian stuff, there was still some Taika in those episodes, right? Maybe it was toned down a little bit,
Tone
but
down
he's
Taika.
still got himself in there. And I think of someone like I'm the second episode in a row I'm bringing up Knuckles, the Paramount Plus show, but in Knuckles, like you had Jeff Fowler come in and do the first episode, and then you had other people come in and direct the other episodes. And episode 4 of Knuckles, again, episode 4, it was directed by Jorma Taccone, who people would know from The Lonely Island and stuff like that. And it was very them. Like you had Michael Bolton doing a musical segment. There was a big musical part of that episode, so it seemed like tailor made for him. So I'm hoping with episode 4, I know they joked about how they did it to get their health insurance and stuff like that, but I still think those two guys will insert themselves a little bit. And I think it's the perfect universe to do so, because you can have weird creatures making weird sounds and they show that they're very good at action with everything everywhere. And I'm very, very much looking forward to episode 4.
Episode 4, A New Hope.
Woo! All right, everyone. Thank you for listening. We really do appreciate it. We'll be back. You can check out our reviews for Nosferatu and Moana 2, which are also up right now. It was a busy Monday for us as we tried to get as much up as we can as some embargoes broke. We'll also have reviews we want to do Wicked and Gladiator 2. I know we're very behind on that, but I think letting that dust settle and then doing a Glicked episode with full spoilers will be fun. So we will do a Glicked episode soon. We'll also have a Complete Unknown and Mufasa for our Disney December. The Disney daddies are doing Disney December. And we'll have more.
No.
All right, everyone. That's it. It's been a long day of recording for me and Eric, so we're going to wrap it up. Go follow us everywhere at Matt Rohrbeck and at EM6211, or it's at Eric Marchin over on Blue Sky. I'm at mattrohrbeck.com over on Blue Sky, and then we're at Untitled Movie Podcasts over on Blue Sky. I'm going to say Blue Sky, Blue Sky, Blue Sky more times. We'd really love to hang out with you guys over there, but we're also on X. At. Do you think their handle is at Adin?
I hope so. Or if there's an admin for
I'm an admin at admin.
It's like a tongue twister.
Yeah. All right, everyone. We're getting a little loopy. So until next time.
Totally wizard.
Bye, everybody.